This week, we speak with Kris, Rajana, and Bhasker Nallapothula from Biarca about bringing the right tools to cloud security posture management. In the news segment, we want to give back to the community, so for each article you send us, we'll review 2 in return. Yes, we discuss the Twitter attack, but also a DNS hack, some confidential computing to unpack, and more. Stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. It's the show to learn the latest tools, techniques, and processes necessary to understand DevOps, application security, and cloud security. Your trusted source for the latest application security news. It's time for Application Security Weekly. Today, cybercriminals are taking advantage of an expanded attack surface to commit malicious activities ranging from hijacking user accounts to making fraudulent purchases. Businesses need solutions that can protect their sites from this increase in fraudulent activity. reCAPTCHA Enterprise is a frictionless fraud detection service that leverages our experience from more than a decade of defending the internet with reCAPTCHA and data for our network of 4 million sites. To learn more about how reCAPTCHA can defend your website or mobile application against fraudulent activity, visit securityweekly.com/reCAPTCHA. Security threats in cloud-native environments move fast, which means that security teams need to have the same visibility into their infrastructure, network, and applications as developers and operations. With Datadog security monitoring, engineering teams can easily detect malicious activity in real time before it affects their customers. Use out-of-the-box detection rules and detailed observability data in one unified platform to investigate security attacks. See it in action by signing up for a live security demo and receive a Datadog t-shirt by visiting securityweekly.com/Datadog. With 84% of cyber attacks targeting the application layer, securing your software is more challenging than ever. Synopsys enables DevSecOps with a portfolio of industry-leading tools including Coverity, Black Duck, and Seeker to help you build secure, high-quality software faster. Synopsys is the leader in application security testing. Visit securityweekly.com/Synopsys to learn more.
Welcome to Application Security Weekly. This is episode 115, recorded July 20th, 2020. I'm your host, Mike Shima. I'm here with Matt Alderman. Hello, Matt.
Good morning, Mike. And I have no comments on that Twitter hack. Yet.
No comments? Yes, yet. All right, good. Well, we also have John Kinsella. John, you're already pretty active in Discord. Do you have any comments on the Twitter hack coming up?
No. Can't go back to sleep.
Perfect. Good thing that we have some announcements anyway. We'll at least have to fill the time somehow. Join the Security Weekly mailing list and receive your invite to our community Discord server by visiting securityweekly.com/subscribe and clicking the button to join the list. With all the recent changes to Black Hat and DEF CON, we realized we can keep doing what we do best, host virtual podcasts. I'm proud to announce Hacker Summer Camp 2020, a Security Weekly virtual live stream event from August 3rd through 6th, 2020. To reserve your slot now, visit securityweekly.com/summercamp2020. Kris brings 25 plus years of storage and cloud experience and is a big proponent of open source philosophy. His customer-centric focus and approach to solving complex technical problems and execution has enabled Biarca to be a trusted advisor to many of their customers. Kris is responsible for engineering and management of distributed teams and execution to ensure on-time, on-spec, on-quality delivery. Kris has led the efforts of customizing Biarca services and solutions across several industries such as healthcare, manufacturing, education, technology, media, and entertainment. We also have Bhasker, who is the Director of Engineering at Biarca and oversees the design and development of cutting-edge cloud solutions with an emphasis on best practices and reliability engineering. Bhasker started his career in Silicon Valley, where he was able to obtain engineering experience with several companies, including Hewlett-Packard, Broadcom, TiVo, and security startup Aoptics. Starting as a developer and soon moving into managing engineering teams, Bhasker brought together global teams for the deployment of server-side system software and tools with an emphasis on embedded systems. Hello, Kris and Bhasker, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Mike. And we also have no comments on Twitter, by the way.
We're actively following up on it.
Well, hopefully you do have some comments on cloud security posture management, because that's something that is more than just checking for misconfigurations. And surely you didn't get into this space just by thinking, just by trying to make sure a few settings were correct. So what was it that brought you into this space and gave you an appreciation for the challenge of setting up a secure environment?
Absolutely. Yeah, great question, Mike. So we actually, as you have rightly put it from our backgrounds, right? So we come from a consulting and building solutions background. And in that capacity, we were architecting transformations of cloud and migrating workloads to the favorite cloud for our customers. And in the process, we came to understand there is a lot more than just clicking buttons and writing scripts to avoid this and avoid that. And hence, we, by doing and developing together in sync with the customer is how we have come about developing Biarca Patrol.
So, and that's important because an approach that you mentioned there was working with developers, working with customers, with partners to build tools. And it came out of what sounds like, actually designing and deploying architectures. So I'm kind of curious too, what were, let's expand a bit more on what it means to look at the cloud posture or even just deploying cloud that's more than clicking buttons. What were some of the problems you saw, or what were some of the unique approaches that highlighted that developers were just struggling with understanding either what's going on in the cloud or how do they get started? Because one of the things that's different with cloud environments and with the DevOps expectations that developers suddenly have to become infrastructure experts too.
Exactly. That is what you nailed it on the head, right? So expertise, having everything that which you have put in that question is a loaded thing. So how do you ensure that the team which you are putting together has all that expertise? And we have seen customers fail and stumble at what they're doing, and they come back to us saying that, hey, this is how. And in the process, we came to know that, as much as there is education from the cloud provider, there is a lot more happening because this ship is being built as it is moving, right? So, and this specific journey for us is actually with Google Cloud. So majority of our customers were on Google Cloud, are still on Google Cloud, and Google Cloud is constantly being built and features are being added on a day-to-day basis. So as you marinate your development team, your DevOps team, is how you have start bringing that knowledge to our customers. So when the customer out of Colorado, the University of Colorado had come to us, these are all how do we ensure that when we migrate our workloads from on-prem to the Google Cloud, we can still meet the requirements of our CISO and the control board, right? And once we understood what is the CISO and control board is looking and what they have had in the predecessor, so what they had on-prem, how do we ensure that that posture gets maintained? So there is a lot more than clicking buttons, as you said, right? But also architecting and migrating in the right way. So Bhasker, remember that the whole document we put together. Why don't you speak a little bit about that?
Right. I think one of the asks of us was to architect a compliant architecture, and this time the compliance was aimed at maintaining HIPAA guidelines and HIPAA controls. So in the process of translating the HIPAA controls over to, say, a Google Cloud architecture, we had to go through every resources configurations and match them to the compliance requirement. And once we did that, there were other aspects of the customer ask. For example, things like how do we determine in real time that there is a breach or maybe there is a deviation from the compliance? That was a requirement. That's not a static configuration. For that, you have to devise certain alerts and you have to recognize patterns of normalcy and what is deviation from normalcy. Once you get hold of that information, the pattern information, then it becomes easier to architect a solution around it. And that's what we seek to do. That's what we sought to do with our Patrol product.
Kris and Bhasker, I think one of the big challenges here is that when I think about an on-prem data center, I have full control of the network, the host, right, in the configuration, right? Now I move to cloud. Now I could move as infrastructure as a service and maybe just have Google Compute Engine and I leave it at that. But most of these architectures are shifting away from just purely running somebody else's computer in the cloud to leveraging a lot of the other platform as a service capabilities that these cloud providers have provided. And I think that's where the big challenge comes in, is because you don't know all the underlying components or configurations of these other services that people are now using as part of this new infrastructure. Can you kind of just give us a little bit of a feeling for how many of these things do we have to deal with versus what we did in the data center, where it was just maybe a network configuration and a server config?
Right. I think I can give you two specific examples on. So a lot of resources that one gets to spin up for a project on a cloud, the default configuration is not sufficient. The default configurations for most part may not be compliant, and they are not compliant. For example, if you take compute, when you spin up just by default a compute instance, most likely it comes up with a public IP. And when we apply that against a compliance control, it would always fail because there is a public footprint for that. So the challenge is to identify when these instances come up during the life cycle of the project and take a remedial action for that. Similarly, there are other configuration controls. For example, I can think of a Cloud SQL instance. A Cloud SQL instance can have you have to run through a litany of options before you get to choose whether it needs to be an SSL access or not. By default, there is no SSL access to that. So that's another a flag to be identified and determine that for this resources, are we having the right checklist? Does it meet those controls? So if a project encompasses many multipliers of these kinds of resources, the challenge to bring them all in one framework is enormous. And that's what we sought to simplify by applying a YAML-based approach. We capture all the desired configuration requirements for each compliance framework. HIPAA has a different rule. PCI DSS has a different compliance requirement. These compliance were then iterated, marked off as a must required, and then we captured that in a YAML rule. And that helped us. Once we have that in YAML, then we have an actionable goal with our tool. So that becomes a normal, and then any deviation from that normal is what we look for, and we try to remediate that in our workflow.
So you have lots of YAML rules because there's lots of services that require all these different validation or checks, right?
That is correct. Yes. So YAML gives us a kind of a flexible framework where it also can take in a very specific customer requirement. For example, there was a requirement where if you detect a public instance of a compute, then not only the remediation is about removing the public IP for that instance, but also shutting down that instance. So that actionable rule has to be defined or work through the workflow there. So you can tailor a specific customer ask in the corresponding YAML configuration.
Got it. So not only does the rule validate the configuration, it also has potentially an action or a remediation component that can also be done, which depending on the client could change depending on whether they want to shut it off or make some other remedial action.
Yes, absolutely. So even though these are all YAML, the thing about the Biarca Patrol tool is it all comes packaged as compliance frameworks. So if you define my project to be either best practices or HIPAA compliant or a PCI DSS framework, then all these YAML rules are coalesced together. They just form one cohesive unit. And then, as you just said, that if there is an actionable item that needs to be addressed because something has deviated from a normal pattern, then the corresponding action takes care of that. And it is almost a near real time is what I would say. And we notify on the Slack channels, and there are a multitude of other channels that you could grab these alerts on.
Yeah, and that absolutely sounds like you're building the workflow to work for developers, meaning you have that visibility just to say this is what your environment looks like. So that aspect of asset inventory, if you will, mapping that to your compliance. So even, for example, HIPAA might say your data has to be within U.S. So you have to be
That's
careful
right.
about where you're spinning up in regions outside of U.S. And that would be very clearly outside of compliance. And that's also pretty, you can build a high confidence that you're generating these alerts and they're actually going to be actionable alerts rather than false positives or that sort of that nebulous, using air quotes here, maybe this is something to look at. It's much more clear that you defined a policy, this is out of policy, something needs to be done. So in that something needs to be done category, what's that remediation look like? How, what's the difficulty there, or what does a developer, how does a developer then follow up when they've been alerted on one of these items?
Right. I think you bring up a very good example there. HIPAA has a certain rule about all resources and the network traffic to be only in the U.S. region, right? So if you take a storage bucket, for example, and that storage bucket spins up in a non-U.S. region, um, the tool does alert and notify that this is a deviation from, this is not a compliant deployment of the resource. The remedial action in this case is you just can't go and delete that instance, because what if that there is already data in there? The more correct action in here is to notify and call the project as in violation, while making sure that the bucket itself is not accessible from that point onwards. So the bucket stays in the project, not accessible, and then you would notify that there is a violation, and that is escalated across all the channels that are available for the events. And thereby, the CISO in there, who's looking through these dashboards, realizes that there is a red alert on the project, and when they drill down to the level of detail, they get to know that there is it's a bucket that's in violation, and they get to then take the appropriate action. In this case, if there is a valid data, then they can move it or export it to a US region and then discard the other bucket. So the remedial actions are also tailored according to a customer interest. In some cases, just delete the resource. In some cases, suspend the resource, make it not accessible. Then they would be investigative. So these are, we have the ability to customize the remedial actions for resource deviations.
Yeah, and even this customization doesn't even have to be for the organization level. It could be at a project level as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yes.
And each project within that organization, there could be a project which is really had to be stringent guidelines, and the workflow has to be having multiple levels of approvals, and that could all be set up as well.
Yeah, and it sounds like the right way to approach the developer population too, because rather than security coming in with a tool that's just going to automatically change the cloud from underneath them, or Bhasker, as you'd pointed out, is accidentally delete data that probably shouldn't have been deleted. That remediation story is a little bit better because it's involving developers for whether approval, like you were saying, Kris, or it could just be up to their individual, depending on the sensitivity, individual decisions.
Correct.
So that also brings us into this idea that we're talking about Biarca Patrol specifically, and this visibility, it's doing some analytics, doing some alerting. Near the end there, we're talking about what happens when there are misconfigurations, and that could either be developer mistakes or there might have been exploitation. So does this also bring us into that aspect of some forensics capabilities, or even let's call it forensic forecasting to be alliterative, saying here's a couple of misconfigurations that exist, what might happen, or what's potentially exposed here?
Yeah, that's really good question, Mike. So let us first just thank John Kinsella, who's on the call along with us, where when he showed this feature to him, he said, hey, that is actually forensic, and there is a gold mine there. So there is a lot more that which a user or your CISO, that whole the security infosec group might want to start looking into. So build on that capability. So that's exactly what we have done. There is a natively available forensic capability given the time window, saying, hey, here is a series of events leading up to this particular minute have happened. let's look at everything prior to that by this time window and everything after that by this time window. So that is natively now available in Biarca Patrol. Of course, this data can also be using telemetry sent into either Datadog, which is one of your sponsors here, to get that kind of insights, and Chronicle and others as well. The Security Command Center of Google, those are all possibilities.
Right. So just to add to Kris's point, we capture all the event and event traces, bubble it up from the logging, the native logging features, and we construct we construct a sort of a tree-like structure which tells you that what is the origin of the event or the incident and what led up to it, and then what is the time window when it happened, and what are the subsequent actions that has been taken by the tool and how it has been resolved. So all of this is captured in a trace, and then it's available on the on your notification channels and the email, and also on the reports. There is also a sliding time window that shows a correlation between events taking place, changes and configurations occurring, and also figuring out where exactly the deviation from more normal has taken place. So that lends itself for more analytics and tuning your configuration, or tuning the I would say best practices down the line for the project managers.
And Bhasker, Matt told us not to exploit or overuse the word ML and AI, but we are talking to ML and AI experts on how to take all these events, saying, hey, this is what usually is expected, and here is what. So classification problems. So we're looking at classification problems,
right.
Matt. So thanks for that advice, and thanks for everything that which you have provided to us as guidance all through these months now, leading into the product.
Yeah,
when you have great data, there's always a model out there that can leverage that data to do something better. You just have to be very specific about what those models are.
That's correct. So we're trying to build it towards being a predictive model, to predicting nature of, while this event happens and it happens in a certain regularity, then you want to know why that happens, and then what we can do about it to address it down the line.
Matt knows as soon as somebody mentions machine learning, I have to get out my rainbow hands and start machine learning thing.
Yeah, you were in that meeting, John. Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool to see how you guys have sort of taken what I thought was a simple statement and run with it. As we talk here, it's an interesting conversation. One of the things, and you might have an answer for this. I'm left field ball. But as we've talked to a few folks in this sort of config, I don't want to call it management space. That was a 10-year-old phrase, 15-year-old phrase. But in this area where you're doing sort of compliance around configuration to a degree. The question is, what is usability looking like? What's the experience like for the customers you guys are working with? I imagine it's going to be a little bit like a static analysis tool. When it first runs, you find all these problems. But what's day in the life, say, like 6 months later for a developer? Are they getting a lot of these remediation automations, or is it something that just keeps the people going in the right direction, gives an occasional reminder? What's the experience like for folks that you've seen?
Bhasker, let me take that question.
Go ahead, Kris.
So in our local healthcare provider that we're working with, so we have the obligation as a service provider, not just this is the tool we happen to be using, but we have an obligation to ensure their production and build environments stay compliant to a posture that which they have called it as minimum security posture, right? So over time, John, what we have seen is that there are aspects of the tool which are not adequate, so we built onto that. And if the tool already has seen and it has repeatedly seen it, we would let the management know that this is what we are seeing. We're going to now turn on auto enforcement for this, because these are kinds of misconfigurations are happening from your side, and within the projects which we are monitoring for you, and let's go to the auto enforcement because this is benign. even if we enforce this is a benign change for you in terms of it's not going to disrupt anything, but it's still a bad misconfiguration. So it is baby steps. We are taking those baby steps and ensuring that this is not going to disrupt anything by going to the auto-enable, auto-remediation phase. So you want to add to that, Bhasker?
Yeah.
So if I can interrupt too, Bhasker, I think perhaps if you have a demo, you can demonstrate for us too, as you describe what this experience is like.
Yeah, I'll come definitely. I think a demo would be a good idea. To add to Kris's point, right? The auto remediation seeks to do one thing, which is, in the larger scale of things, there is a compliance, there is configuration, and there is a compliance, right? But there is always a possibility of deviations occurring in the process of compliance management and in process of when the project grows and newer resources are added. So the auto remediation plays the role of helping with detecting zero-day vulnerabilities, if you will. So any misconfiguration that happens opens a channel for a possible intrusion or an attack, right? So which is what the zero-day vulnerabilities is all about. That you minimize those channels of intrusion and the chances of a zero-day vulnerability coming through it. That's what the auto remediation seeks to do. Once you have set up a configuration that is complies to a certain control for a posture, then any deviation from there is what the auto remediation picks upon and tries to enforce. So, yeah. Shall we take a quick look at the tour of the tool?
Yeah, why don't you talk us through? Yeah.
Sure.
All right. Okay. So let's do. Let me share my screen. Desktop. Okay. So here is the landing page for our tool. This is the Biarca Patrol. Few things around it. At a glance, it'll give us the number of scans that are taking place. Every day, there are scans happening as project managers make changes to the configuration or add new resources, delete new resources. And then this will give you the compliance count, the vulnerability count. If there are any projects that are vulnerable, you will see this number. So this is a red flag. So at a glance, you will know whether your project is secure or not. A green is a good thing. It's all clear. And the compliance type framework right now that you see for this particular demo project testing is its best practices. So you can go ahead and change these configurations. You can enable from best practices, you can drop down to HIPAA, and then you get the entire HIPAA compliance set. And then the other aspects of these are the auto enforcers enabled. That's what we recommend. That keeps the compliance portion in place. The compliance alignment, I think that we just talked about, is your best practices, and there's a compliance requirement across all the resources that's possible. You have cloud cycle buckets, you have a firewall rules, network-related compute instances, and pretty much BigQuery has a few compliance requirements. That in a nutshell is what the seeks to do. So how does this project operate, right? How does this tool operate typically? So let's just say that this tool is now watching over the configuration for a project called testing. So if I switch over to, say, the console, Google console on this one. That is, yeah, okay. So that is on here. Okay, let's go on this. Okay, so this is the Google console for the testing project, and I am in the compute instances here. What we can do is I can create a compute instance, and let's just walk through the default, and you'll see that the default is not sufficient. So a compute instance is spawned. One of the use cases is for this particular compliance is, let's just say that the some service accounts or credentials are compromised, and there is an attack that comes in to create instances on the project, unauthorized instances, and they start to launch things, attacks, or maybe some super secret stuff, right? So super secret, say, mining operation in place. Mining instance, right? And it gets launched. When it gets launched, by default, if you will see, there is a public IP that gets associated if you're not careful enough in going through the configuration and making sure that you are really wanted a private instance in place. But in this case, if there is an attack, they would always launch. So there is a public instance getting created, right? So what our tool is must have gone into action right now. So let's go to the part where our tool is, and you can see that it gets notified. The first thing when it picks on the notifications, there you go. New computer instance is created, and it validates that new instance. As soon as you create new instances are created, it gets validated, and it determines what exactly is going on with the new instance. You can see that now a scan has taken place. It's launched a scan because it's watching over every aspect and every minute of it for all the project resources. So the end of the scanning, it will determine that, well, you know what, has been a problem. There is a public instance that was detected, and that public instance is not good. And it seeks to determine that. So it'll go through its churn. It'll talk to Google Cloud, determine all the parameters, and determine that, at some point this was a violation. So if you look at the previous triggers, we can just take a look while this is going on. So that was... So their instance was launched and there was a deviation, and then it comes back to determine that that deviation is not good. So you can see here, it's a violation. If you go back in here, it says there is a violation, there is one violation. It's because of the public IP in there. Now, it doesn't just sit there talking about the violation, it just goes ahead and removes the public access for that instance. So if we switch back in here, back to the Google instance, you can see that this is in place, right? So at some point, this will be taken off. The public IP on that instance will be taken out, and then it'll be shut down as well, because that's what we defined as an actionable thing for any violation of this kind. So going back in here, it keeps doing it. It does its job. It's continuing to do it, and it's running. So that means it's churning. So you can see that the trace here, the event originated, it was because there was something wrong with that particular instance. And then it will fix it. So in the meanwhile, the admins and the CISOs are notified what is going on. So external IP is deleted now. You can see that. It's been deleted. And then computer instance is also stopped. So we can go back and validate the same. So you can see the refresh of it.
So for those of our listeners,
showing us is that, yeah, I was going to say, sorry, John, is that we've been seeing the workflow of a policy in place. Instance has been created that violates the policy, an alert happens, which was actually posted to Slack in this case. So there's a mechanism that, fits where, and I think you also mentioned email. So notification mechanisms that work where your developers are, where your CISO is, for example, and demonstrating what the problem was, in this case, what the automatic remediation was. Don't know if, John, you wanted to add something there.
No, perfect. I'm just thinking of our people who just listen to a podcast. So,
right. Well, I think,
yeah. So I think too, Bhasker, where can people, how can someone get started with this? Where's the best place to find this for their Google Cloud environment?
Yep. So right now we can find Patrol we have released in the marketplace. So one can go to marketplace and look for a Patrol under the security products, and they should find all the instructions on how to download and install. So now it's all enabled, it's scanned again and ensures that it is all clear. So all the violations are gone, it's 0, and it's green back on. So that is one good use case of what this tool does, and it does a lot more. So while it does these instances, it can do some misconfiguration changes for SQL instances and so on and so forth. Pretty much all of the GCP resources are covered with respect to compliance posture.
What I think is really interesting in this demo, if people get a chance to view it, is that you didn't actually do anything within Biarca Patrol. It did it automatically. It's like as soon as the instance came up, it saw it, it scanned it, it identified the violation, it sent the notifications, then it went back, deleted the IP, shut down the instance. You didn't do anything within Patrol other than refresh a bunch of screens, which I think is really interesting because that shows the power of kind of that near real-time nature of the product. When it saw the violation, it had a rule, it knew what to do. All it was just alerting you to what it actually did.
Absolutely, Matt, you got it right. It's completely zero touch, I would say. So if someone were to get hold of things, got hacked, a project, things happen, and then they were to launch, there are different layers to catch your security violations, right? So if they were to launch, say, a whole bunch of compute instances to denial of service or crypto mining or what have you, we are sure that our tool will catch that and will ensure that you're notified in time and the instances will not even come online.
Yeah, Twitter needed that a few days back.
Yeah.
I know we're running short on time. Can I squeeze in one more, Mike, if you don't mind?
Go for it.
Cool. So this is again, it's. I think this is really interesting. And it could be a long conversation by itself, but let's sort of give it for 30 seconds or a minute. The question which had been in my mind for the last few weeks when I think about compliance products is, why do I want this? Doesn't Vagrant or Terraform or Ansible or all those things, if I fall out of compliance, I can just rerun my tool and can bring it back in. I'm curious what your guys' opinion is about that statement.
So if you look at the three aspects of deploying project, right? So there is a build and deploy on the left. There is a run. So when you deploy, it's all runtime configuration. And after runtime, you also have a monitor and respond. So while you deploy with all the compliance controls in place, over time, there is no monitoring of deviation from that compliance. So that happens on the run. And how do you detect that? That happens on the monitor and respond aspects of it. So Patrol seeks to ensure that what you intended during your build and deploy phase continues to be maintained in the runtime and also in the response aspects of it. So we're continuously monitoring, we're continuously responding to events that show that there is a deviation from the original compliance. And that's what we seek to do. So I hope that answers your question, John.
So I think it does one aspect, Bhasker, but I think there's a second part too there that I was trying to soft pitch you guys, to be honest, and that's because that really comes down to, if I have a cron job which runs once a minute, my Ansible scripts go keep things in place. So that's not perfect, but that's a counter to that. But at the same time, I think one thing that you guys have, which me writing my own Ansible script doesn't have, is that collection of compliance rules of these are the things which should be in place and should be done, right? So it's that balance between both of those things, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and I want to say,
knowing the best practices. I'm sorry, Mike. So it's knowing the best practices, right? Yeah. And also understanding what is the posture that which the organization wants to align itself, whether it's a NIST or CSA or CIS, and out of those, if there is segment, right? And that a developer may not have all the information as he's spinning up his Terraform templates.
Well, we've gotten a lot of information from you, so that's for sure. And clearly, we could keep going on on this topic because there's definitely some good questions that are still coming up, and it's just some great product design and philosophy behind this. I think that's good to demonstrate too. Going back to what you were initially saying, work with the developers, understand their problems, and then figure out how a solution works for them. So, thank you for sharing this, Kris and Bhasker. We'll hope to have you back.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us on, Mike. And Matt, thanks for all the advice and mentorship for us. Really appreciate every comment that which you have given. And John, you see the nested feature of the event as well. So I just wanted to give a holler for you. So that is one of the aspects that which we talked about. Thank you once again, folks. The product is available on Google Marketplace for download. This is in production. Customers are currently using it. We have a version of it possibly coming down the pike for AWS, but our focus is, given our expertise and all our pedigree coming from Google Cloud, that's where we intend to shine. As Google Cloud on Air is happening, we felt like this is the right time to get the product out to the market.
Thanks again, Kris. And I also want to have to say, sorry, Bhasker. I'm talking over you.
I just wanted to add,
go ahead.
Yeah. and I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you again both. And I also have to also thank Matt and John on my behalf as well for always helping out with these segments. Thanks, guys, and thanks everyone for listening. We're going to take a quick break and return with news of the week.